Good evening, everybody. As you know, I'm Councillor Stan Forecast, the chairman of this committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you this evening. The meeting will be broadcasted live and recorded for playback on the council's YouTube channel. Will anyone else be recording proceedings? I doubt it. Oh, I don't like hearing that. I'm joking. If the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated, and members of the Democratic Services team will give further instruction if necessary. Item 1, apologies. I've received apologies from Councillor Hinder and Wilkinson. Are there any other apologies? No. Item 2, substitute members. Can't see any. Item 3, there's no urgent items this evening. Item 4, there's no visiting members this evening. Item 5, are there any disclosures by members or officers? No, none. Item 6, are there any disclosures of lobbying? None. Cool. Item 7, I move that all items be taken into public. Is that agreed? Agreed. Anyone else agree? Yeah. Item 8, are there any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting? No comments. Item 9, I move that the forward plan be noted. Is that agreed? Agreed, yeah. Item 10, the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan update. This report, a very good report, by the way, thank you guys, will be introduced by Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. So the Policy and Resources Committee adopted the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan on October the 21st, 2020, with the last update report published in July 2023. Since the last update report, officers have explored the options to focus the Council's biodiversity and climate change strategy in discussion with Cabinet and with consideration to PAC feedbacks. These have included, they focused on ways forward in achieving net zero housing borough-wide, progressing sustainable integrated transport, solar energy generation investment, local energy action plans, and biodiversity enhancements. So the report details these ongoing initiatives, which in the main relate to NBC property decarbonisation, fleet decarbonisation, and monitoring the council's carbon footprint. You'll see the report also highlights progress implementing the action plan, including the success of the Eco Hub, which was really successful, the status of planned solar projects, tree planting efforts, and the details of the Rural England Prosperity Fund. And you can see the full details of each action in Appendix 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudine. Is there anyone who'd like to comment on the report at all? Councillor Harper.
Thanks, thank you, Chair. Faye and I were at a meeting where this same item was discussed last night at Corporate Services. So I'm not going to repeat everything I said there. I'd first of all like to thank James and the staff team for the work they've done in terms of this report and in terms of the information given in the appendix, which shows the fact that in a lot of items we seem to be working our way through them, and also the fact of the 5 additional items in paragraph 2.4 for consideration. That said, it's difficult at an individual meeting to actually understand how the council is doing, because there actually are at least 38 actions in the former plan, which we had presented to us in April, I think it was 2022, when at that time the full action plan was submitted to each of the policy advisory committees, so you can actually see the totality of what was actually happening, whereas now we seem to be not allowed to see the totality of what's in that appendix unless you actually go to every single meeting and cut and paste it all together. So we're sort of missing the holistic view on progress in that appendix. And I note also there's quite a few items listed where the completion date is 2030. Now, by 2030, we're supposed to be a carbon neutral borough, but if we're not actually going to know if we've achieved any of the targets until 2030, it's going to be a bit late, because what do? We can't turn the clock off and freeze the clock at a minute to midnight on the 31st of December 2029. So there's a concern there. I think, and I'm going to move an amendment later, which would be the same amendment which was successfully agreed by the Policy Advisory Committee last night. But before I do so, I just wanted to ask the officers, and this is something I didn't do last night, if they can confirm if we are still working on the 38 action points from the original action plan, which is in the appendices, or if we've replaced those by points 1 to 5 in paragraph 2.4, which are the new items, or if they're all being worked on. It's just so that we have a bit of a feel, because if we have reduced down, as we suggested, I think during the last calendar year at this committee and other committees, we were trying to do too much of the 38 points. But if we're still doing the 38 points plus these extra 5 points, we've gone rather against what we were trying to achieve, which was to home in on target. So before I go any further, it'd be useful to understand quite, where we fall in that sort of that range.
Thank you. I'll take a couple of the points and then I'll ask James Waterspoon to just answer the last one. So we've got the items that relate to RPAC, quite rightly, as Councillor Harper said, so that we can concentrate on the things that relate to our committee. But at the Cabinet meeting, they will all be brought back together into the full report. So if you want to go to one place where it's all together, it will be the Cabinet agenda. And if you want to attend the Cabinet meeting, that's where it will all come back together. On the table, thank you, in the appendix, we've got the start dates and the completion dates and the progress. Obviously, at the moment, we're all on track, but bearing in mind this has got a long window to 2030, we will just keep looking at that and see what happens as we go along the way. So I think that's a good indication of where we are now, but we do need to remember that it is a full plan that goes for a lot of years. So I think we will start to see if things are falling behind, or as we get towards the end, some of these, I'm hoping they will all remain green, but they may. That's what we need to keep a check on. The 38 original action points that have gone into the new points and quite how that's worked, I'm going to ask James to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add then, so you're right, in April last year, it was the annual review of the action plan, and at that time we were trying to cut the actions down to what was in the direct control of the council. So I believe the previous action plan was something like 60 something, and we were trying to hone it down to make it more able to measure and keep track of those targets. So that, and then since then, subsequently, we've also had to cut it for the PAC so that we can concentrate each committee on the actions relevant to that. And then, as Councillor Russell says, it will come back together for Cabinet. In terms of everything that's in those 38 actions, they're what we can directly control or have influence of for the council. And so those are loosely around 2030 as an end date. And the big one is our carbon emissions. That's the biggest milestone, it's the biggest measure for it. So all of those feed into that, but I would say keeping track of that one and making sure that we're on track for that, that's the most important one. In terms of the new strategic directions, with the mention of the net zero transport and the net zero, the domestic housing, that's their government targets, and that's obviously 2050 when we're meant to be, as a nation, net zero. We have a slightly advanced target for that. It's 2041, and that's based on trajectory of how we can cut carbon emissions through housing, through transportation, through the logistics chains, through contract to 2041. But legally, we're held to 2050 to be net zero as a borough, just like the rest of the government is. So there is overlapping targets in the action plan because some of them refer to housing and some of them refer to transport. So I'll just try to be clear that the council's commitments are to 2030, the national government's commitments are to 2050, and we'll try and beat that, basically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. My main points really are around the items in paragraph 2.4 in the report, and as was discussed last night at committee, that nobody, if you like, says any of those 5 items. They're all really good. They're all things we would all want to achieve, but it's a time scale they can be achieved in. I think that was the issue we discussed last night. So, for instance, the second bullet point there, which is sustainable integrated transport, that at the moment Maidstone tends to have one of the highest car dependency rates in the whole UK. Something like over 85% of journeys are, and it might even be 90% are done by car, with a very low proportion done either by public transport or cycling and walking. So to get a sustainable integrated transport strategy, which I'm sure everybody would want, from where we're starting, we've got an enormous journey to do, and it's one we need to do. But I'd suspect by the time we get to that sort of 2030 cut-off, we may have started, but as we all know, to try to encourage people to leave their cars at home, and most morning journeys in the town are probably parents dropping off kids at school, living opposite the biggest collection of secondary schools in the borough. I see that every single day, twice a day down the road I live, and I'm sure all councillors around with local schools nearby will see the same thing. So we've got a massive journey to do. And it's the same actually when we go through some of those other items like the park and ride EV strategy. I don't think anybody's going to object to the idea of doing that, and the policy framework for solar farms, and then the issue around the heating homes by heat pumps. They're all good things, but I can't honestly see them all happening by 2030 and even potentially 2050, because whilst these years sort of sound a long way off, let's remember we're already into February 2024, so these dates are fairly close. And I won't go on any more. As I say, we asked quite a lot last night on it, but I will move what we did last night because we do welcome those items. But I think our concern is that we want to try to have some action plans around how we take those 5 items forward in more detail to see how we'll have the key milestones and actually if we are on target with getting them brought in. So what we did, and it will be the same wording we used at the Corporate Services Policy Advisory Committee, which was agreed by everybody. So that will be sort of an extra recommendation or amendment. So number 2, and it will be that action plans for items in 2.4 are submitted to committees as soon as possible and no later than September 2024. So that's the wording of the amendment. And we did check, because Faye last night seconded it, and we did amend it, because originally we were asking, I know I did, last night we initially said July 24, but listening to the officers and also to Simon Webb, we decided that September just gave a bit more scope for people to be able to start to draft up these action plans, just so we have a better feel as to how can we take some of them forward.
And it's within the 6 months.
And it's within the sort of 6 month in terms of the review process, and given sufficient time, I think also with the sort of recess in August for officers hopefully to be able to prepare action plans. And I'm not looking for massively detailed ones on them all, and I can understand if some of these items might be a bit thinner on the ground, depending how much work people have been able to do. But it just gives us a stance to actually know that we can achieve it all. So at that point, I shall hopefully hand over to Faye.
I'll second that. Thank you, Chairman, that proposal. And then, but a couple of puzzled faces. Do you want to go through it again?
I'll read it again. So it's so we keep number 1, which is the existing recommendation on the paper. Yeah. Okay. So this is an additional recommendation, and that action plans for items in 2.4 are submitted to committees as soon as possible and no later than September 2020, or the September 2024 committee cycle, just for fullness.
To secure it.
Yeah.
Because we've got elections.
Yeah. You got that, Debbie?
No, I've got it. Yeah, we've got it, Councillor Harper and Gooch. Thank you. Councillor Russell, do you want to comment on if that's going to be a workable time frame?
I mean, I think if it was a recommendation from last night's pack and it's exactly the same one, then it will be coming forward anyway. So I can't see why we should say no to something that's already come from another pack. Extra clarity though, so on the 5 items, not all of them relate to this committee. So would you be happy if they were split to the committees? As in, what I don't want to do, where we've split it, but it would seem silly, once we've split it to the committees, we almost want to keep that split, then bring the whole thing back together. Otherwise, the action plan will sit for 5 overarching things and will come to each committee. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as all those 5 items have been reported back in the September cycle, I'm not that precious that it's all got to be in one place, but it's just the fact that they need to be reported in that September cycle. Yeah.
And we, if I could just add to that, we wouldn't want to make work for you. If it's easier for you to do it this way, if there's a bit of overlap, for goodness sake, this is too important. So. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So in addition to the recommendations we have, you'd like action plans to the relevant committee by September 2024. Yeah? Yeah. No.
Chairman, we've got elections coming up. We don't know what's going to happen. We want to secure this because it is very important.
No, completely understand and completely agree. Is there any other speakers who wish to come in on the Councillor Fort?
On the Rural England Prosperity Fund, I see we've already given some grants, and there is an application that we're looking at now. Has the uptake been good?
I think, actually having sat on the panel today to award some of those grants, this second round, the uptake's been a lot better than the first round. I mean, we did 4 in the first round, awarded 4 different things, but yeah, I think, how many do we, 14? 12. I think we looked at awarding around the 12 today. So I think there were good schemes that came in, good for the community, solar, battery storage, and different places. So yeah, no, really good schemes I think for this, and yeah, it was very good quality what was submitted, took a long time to look through, and I think there'll be good awards and hopefully be awarded soon, publicised in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Eagle, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank the officers, James and Gemma, for what they've done here. I think it's very good. I agree with the amendment as well, to have an action plan on that. May I just suggest that it goes back into one rather than the several packs, because you are creating more work for yourself then, aren't you? But if you've got more work now, action plans on the items, to go to separate packs, would it be easier for the officers just to do as it was originally, perhaps?
I think what happened before, bearing in mind when you get the whole document, you can only do actions, make recommendations on the things that apply to that committee. So if there you then said, oh, could you go and ask Pied Pack to do this? The way our constitution works, you can't send a recommendation from one committee to the other committee. So that's why it has to go up to Cabinet for the whole thing. So hence why we split in the first place. So I think, yeah.
Start him off, he might start changing the constitution. I couldn't stand it.
But just one last thing, I think we ought to really start looking at adaptation measures more now, the situation that we find ourselves in. We reached 40 degrees again this last summer, didn't we? And globally, 1.5 C has been achieved now, you know. Oh, yeah. So I think we should be including a lot more adaptation measures in this if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that's coming out from the Environment Agency now is encouraging everyone to future-proof their sites and risk their sites against climate change for exactly what you said. So I think it would be a prudent thing to try and build in. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to express my thanks for for the report. There's an awful lot of good stuff in here, and it's good to read. And also, thank you very much, James, for the email that you sent out. Was it just before Christmas? I can't remember. But that was helpful. Yeah, but anyway, thank you for that, because I know that there's an awful lot of work that's going on here, and I just think that you really ought to get the credit. And so I hope that we're doing that to you. We made a bash at it yesterday, didn't we, at our committee last night. Now, having said that, I would just like to, I keep hovering about these national issues. For example, the integrated transport. All the time we've got parental choice for schools, you're never going to get the mums and the kids out of the cars. They'll be dashing off to go to work or dashing off to have a meeting on the corner of the street, because they do discuss school stuff after they drop the kids off, and then they have a meeting and start talking about stuff that's about school. I know, because when I walk past them, I do a little bit earwigging, and they're always talking about it's either homework or whatever it is. So I think there's quite a fundamental issue there. I'm not convinced we're going to crack it. Solar farms was rather interesting, because, as I said last night, the Medway Valley, beautiful, but perfect places for solar farms. Now, I could be shot for saying that. I think what I'm trying to say is at some point, we as a nation have got to decide what really matters to us. And almost the same kind of argument with the capital programme. We looked at the capital programme last night, and I thought, I wonder if there is enough in there. Is there anything in there that you're looking forward to or want to plan to do? Because there's you mentioned funding, forward funding in here, maybe for residents, funding opportunities, and I'm thinking, crikey, we don't know what the future holds, do we? But if the government's not doing anything, perhaps we should be prepared to do something, in which case, well, we've missed this budgetary round and things are getting tougher and tougher. So on one hand, I really want to support you and say, yes, go for it. And on the other hand, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, does it mean we build fewer houses, in which case our temporary accommodation goes up? So this really, your report really got me thinking and worrying on one hand, but being relieved on another hand. I would like to, hang on, I refer to my notes. Confidence in the system. I think this goes back to having taxis and a decent transport system, plenty of EVs. It would help the taxi drivers, and in fact, I think it would help a lot of people driving electric cars if they could rely on the source of electricity, because they don't always work, they're not always maintained, they're not all in a public area 24/7. So I think we need to build on a bit of confidence there. What is good about this, it seems to me that you're working towards a golden thread. We've worked hard to get a golden thread for people's health and well-being, a thread going through all our policies. And the same is happening for having a carbon awareness. I was going to say green, I don't want to, but you know what I mean? We're trying to get that into our thinking through all our departments, and that can only be a good thing, and I'm really pleased to see that. One thing, before I wrap up, can I just ask, I was fascinated by this software that you talked about. It's in the papers somewhere. Does it mean that you could actually look at the Maidstone Borough and think, whoa, Barming's a hot spot, they're churning out a load of carbon emissions there. You know, is that, Barming's my patch, but I'm just using my patch just as an example. Is that something you could do so that you could focus in on? I was just trying to understand this software that you've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. Councillor Russell.
So I'll start and then James can then answer the technical bit about the software. Leave that to him. Look, there's a lot there to unpack. I think, so obviously tonight our committee is meeting to discuss this one item on the agenda, but I think it's so important that we still met to discuss this because, you know, it's really important to everything that we do as a council, to all of the decisions that we make. So I hope you appreciate that, you know, you're here for one item, but it's one of the most important ones. So start with that. We've got the, I think all of these things are just things that we think about all the time now, and quite rightly so. You know, we've got a climate emergency on our hands, and we've got, don't forget, we've got the carbon literacy training coming up for councillors on the 24th of February. So if you've done it, fantastic. If you couldn't make it because it was a weekday, this is a Saturday. So hopefully we've got lots of people signed up for that. You mentioned about the solar panels. This is me personally. I hate to see them put on best most versatile agricultural land, but I love to see them directed towards public buildings and roofs and everything like that. So, you know, in car park, yes, fantastic car parks. You know, the new police thing in the Brenchley Gardens, all of that is absolutely where they should be. And then capital. How could you sit there on this committee and not remember the change that we've made in the leisure centre, moving it onward from from a normal build and putting forward
funding, yeah, but funding generally for residents. Help
enough
out here.
capital to make it a passive, that, you know, an environmentally sound building. So I hope that demonstrates that certainly this committee, our portfolio, and all of my cabinet colleagues, we are always thinking about it in the decisions that we make. For the software, over to James.
Thank you. If I could also just pick up on some of because it's a very wide-ranging strategic area, so transport, domestic housing. It's more that on paper we would be able to comply with legal things set by national government. So how many EV chargers we need to meet demand as demand grows towards not having petrol vehicles, so that we would capture things like that. How they're spread out, how we would have policies in place for how we tackle people who don't have driveways and have to rely on you know, curbside. So that's the kind of thing that the strategies would hope to achieve. And even if we don't have direct control of it because it's KCC and their highways, we have something on paper to say how we would like it to be rolled out in the borough. So that's what these new strategic areas are looking at. For domestic housing, absolutely, the software has run a net zero scenario for all the housing, domestic houses in the borough. We can break it down by demographics, by the age of the building, and by EPC rating. And so we can click in what happens if we install solar panels, what happens if we put new windows on, what happens if we insulate that building. And it gives us costs per building, per area, and we can hotspot it. So we can come up with strategies for more economically deprived areas and how we can look for funding for that. We can look for more rural areas and where solar would be easier to do outside of conservation areas and so on. So it will give us a much better picture of the borough and where we can look at these projects and try and get money from the energy companies and from the government to work on these projects.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm not sure that we've got it. I think that's what I was meaning with our capital programme, which is 10 years we'd look over it. And I'm thinking, we'd have to really rely on government funding and other people other than the borough, I think. But with you all the way on that.
No, absolutely. It would be influence. It would be where we can try to have the policy, have the strategy that we want the best for the borough, and then that's in place. So then we can go seek the funding and find that help.
Thank you, James and Faye. Councillor Harper, did you want to come in?
Yeah, if that's okay. I mean, just picking up the point which Faye was talking about in terms of vehicle EV charging points, and I think you did actually mention it, James. I think we have to remember that a large proportion of the houses in the borough, I wouldn't say what percentage, I've no idea, but don't have any off-street parking. And I think the big concern, and I see it when I go around Fountain, Oakwood areas on a daily basis, is people with off-street parking are taking, or more, the higher proportion of people with electric vehicles and hybrids are people with off-street parking. And we all see it with people's electric vehicles and charging points. But you very rarely see any evidence of anybody who has no off-street parking having an electric vehicle. You just don't see electric vehicles parked in the road. And in fact, in the whole of Fan, there's 4,500 or 4,700 houses. I only know of one person who doesn't have their own off-street parking, actually, who does have an electric vehicle. And so I think it's going to be really important that we don't end up, as you get sort of in terms of digital technology and people accessing digital, there's a group of people who are digitally excluded. We don't want to find large parts of the population almost excluded from having electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles just because the infrastructure is not there for how you charge a car if you don't have off-street parking. And 2030 or 2035, the targets when non-electric vehicles aren't going to be available. It's not that far off, but not just in Maidstone, but if you think across the country, probably most people in the country don't have off-street parking. They're living in sort of Victorian and sort of 70s terraces with no off, and so I think it's a massive issue. And I do remember being in here for a briefing in probably about 2018 when there was officers from Kent County Council as well as Maidstone, and we were discussing this then. And my worry, I suppose, in a way, is that it's not been clinched. And it's not just Kent and Maidstone, but this issue really has got to be grasped fast so that we don't end up having a massive problem going forward. That said, I wanted to perhaps quickly focus on page 20/21, which is the partly action plan on 6.6 and 6.7, which are around about the biodiversity items, and probably some areas I'm sort of most familiar with in terms of practicality, especially 6.7. And I think the council perhaps should try to be a bit more ambitious, because I linked those up to, paragraph 2.29 in the main report, and it's talking about 6,000 trees to be planted in this spring. Well, on one day last November, I and a group of people planted over 500 saplings in Gatland Park alone, just on a Saturday morning, and we've got another 300 more to plant there a weekend before the end of the tree planting season in March. So I'm thinking that with things like the Woodland Trust scheme, where any community group can apply for up to 500 saplings to plant, we could really be looking at significant planting. Now, those sort of planting schemes, 500 saplings sounds a massive, and it is a big number, don't get me wrong, but the way you tend to plant those, you plant them very dense is the way to do it. So 500 saplings would probably not even necessarily occupy an area the size of this room, but ultimately, through natural selection, you will end up getting a good copse of trees over time, and even during that time, they'll all be absorbing carbon and improving the biodiversity, because I think picking up Derek Councillor Eagle's point, in terms of adaptation, the more trees we can get planted across our borough, because we only do what we can in Maidstone, trees are one of the best resources there are to help us combat carbon. They absorb carbon, but they're also good for the wildlife and the biodiversity. They help absorb water in terms of runoff, and given we're heading into a climate where we're going to have a lot more storms, we only have to think of the last 4 months to know that's what that's doing. So the more trees we can get planted in whatever schemes, and I say schemes like the Woodland Trust with community groups, I think we could be a lot more ambitious if we start to work them a bit more, and just to really up the tree cover in the urban area as much as as well as the rural area, because most people live in the town, and it also the well-known health benefits and just general benefits. I mean, there's nothing wrong. It's a good idea to plant trees. I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea, and as I say, it's a concrete way to show people that we actually are doing stuff to help with biodiversity. And I'm not saying all the other items in the report, but they're more focused, if you like, on the carbon change elements of it, rather than, if you like, improving the nature and the biodiversity. So I welcome what's there. I just think we need to perhaps think a bit more out of the box with our colleagues in the green space team and so on, about how can we get local communities like the one I've got sorted out, engaging with the Woodland Trust to get thousands and thousands and thousands of trees. And it doesn't cost anything, because if you do it through the Woodland Trust scheme, you get these things free. If a community group applies for them, it doesn't cost a penny. So all the trees we've been putting into Gatland Park hasn't cost anyone in Maidstone 1p. They've all been free. Just to think about, especially when money's tight.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Claudine or James, do you want to come back?
I am going to pass to Gemma in a minute, actually. She's got the expert knowledge on this. But obviously, from my farming background, I know there are various different schemes that you can use to plant the trees with, but I think they carbon account for those trees within those schemes. So these would be specifically like the Borough Council, and then they would count towards the Borough Council's carbon target. And I think that's how that works, but I'm going to pass that to Gemma just to double check.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Yeah, that is the case. So with the Woodland Trust schemes, we do promote them through things like our newsletter and our website, and we do, for example, if schools or things get in contact, or if there's any community groups that get in contact that maybe are a bit too small scale for our actual projects, we would promote things like the Woodland Trust scheme. However, unfortunately, those trees we can't keep track of. That is all kept track of by the Woodland Trust, and that is all actually accounted by them as well. So when we discuss the 6,000 that we referenced in this report, we aren't talking about those additional schemes that we promote out to community groups and schools and things. We are just talking about the ones which we are responsible for, we have funded and we have planted.
Could I just, actually, is it possible, I mean, I'm just wondering then, I mean, that's a good point, Jim, as to whether there's any way we could, you know, speak with the community groups actually doing it for, say, the woodland, just so we've got an idea of, like as I say, like the fact that I've got all these saplings planted. It'd just be useful to know as sort of an adjunct to it, so we know what the council's doing direct. But then if we could suddenly say, in addition to that, I don't know, X communities have planted X thousands of trees in the last year, so it makes, when we talk, you know, when we talk with the public in terms of this sort of thing, it just looks much more holistic and much better as well, I think, you know, because I'm sure the total number of trees being planted is probably a lot bigger than here, and it would just be good if there's any way, talking of a number of groups, we might get a feel for that, because I just think that would really encourage people, and as we know, success always encourages success. So, it might not be easy to do, I don't know, but it's just, if you can, I just think we can really get this thing ramped up. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. A good point, well made. I can't see anybody else dying to. Councillor Fort.
Just a quick question. We have a number of old listed properties in the borough. What sort of mitigation can they do? Because it's obviously, if it's a listed building, there's not a lot. Is there anything that can be done to reduce the carbon footprint?
Yeah, they are tricky. On a case-by-case basis, I think when planning laws get relaxed, we might have another look. But at the moment, we've been focusing on things like LED lighting and, you know, things that don't really change the fabric of that building, but can offer some benefits at the same time. But when you're talking with things that are actual grade 1, grade 2 listed properties, you know, Archbishop's Palace is grade 1, it is a lot harder, to do anything that might impact on the structural integrity of that building, or even the outside and what it looks like when you look at it. So yeah, good point.
Thank you, Councillor Fort and Russell. Is there anyone else who wants to come in lastly? No. So we do have a motion, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Harper, but that will be to approve the recommendations as per the papers, with the inclusion of an action plan, a relevant action plan brought to this committee by September 2024 at the latest.
In respect of the items and paragraphs.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So all those in favour? Yeah, happy? That's unanimous. Brilliant. Well, thank you, members, and that brings the meeting to an end.